that the taste of good and evil depends in large part on the opinion we have of them. Men, says an old Greek maxim, are tormented by the opinions they have of things, not by the things themselves. There would be a great point gained for the relief of our wretched human lot if someone could prove this statement true in every case. For if evils have no entry into us but by our judgment, it seems to be in our power to disdain them or turn them to good use. If things give themselves up to our mercy, why shall we not dispose of them and arrange them to our advantage? If what we call evil and torment is neither evil nor torment in itself, if it is merely our fancy that gives it this quality, it is in us to change it. And having the choice, if no one forces us, we are strangely insane to tense ourselves for the course that is more painful to us, and to give sickness, poverty, and slights a bitter and unpleasant taste, if we can give them a good one, and if fortune furnishing merely the material, it is for us to give it form. But let us see whether this can be maintained, that what we call evil is not evil in itself, or at least, whatever it is, that it depends on us to give it a different savor and a different complexion, for all this comes to the same thing. If the original essence of the things we fear had power to lodge in us of its own authority, it would lodge alike in everyone, for men are all of a kind, and are furnished, though some more and some less, with similar tools and instruments for thought and judgment. But the diversity of the opinions we have of things shows clearly that they enter us only by mutual agreement. One man, perchance, lodges them in himself in their true essence, but in 1,000 other men they are given a new and contrary essence. We consider death, poverty, and pain our principal adversaries. Now this death, which some call the most horrible of horrible things, who does not know that others call it the only haven from the torments of this life, the sovereign good of nature, the sole support of our freedom, and the common and prompt remedy for all evils. One man complains of its ease. Death, would that you scorned to take the coward's life, and came only to valor. Lucan. How many low-born people do we see led to death, and not a simple death, but mingled with shame and sometimes with grievous torments, bringing to it such assurance, some through stubbornness, others through natural simplicity, that we see no change from their ordinary manner, setting their domestic affairs, commending themselves to their friends, singing, preaching, and keeping up a conversation with the people, sometimes even joking and drinking to their friends, yielding in nothing to Socrates. One man who was being led to the gallows said they must not go by a certain street, since there was a danger that a certain merchant might have him collared for an old debt. Another told the hangman not to touch him on the throat for fear of making him shake with laughter, he was so ticklish. Another replied to his confessor, who was promising him that he should sup that day with our Lord, "You go there yourself, for my part I'm fasting." Another, having asked for a drink and seeing the hangman drink first, said he would not drink after him for fear of catching the pox. Everyone has heard the story of the man of Picardy to whom on the scaffold they presented a wench, offering, as our justice sometimes allows, to save his life if he would marry her. He, having looked at her a while and noticed that she was lame, said, tie up, she limps." And likewise they say that in Denmark a man condemned to have his head cut off, being offered similar terms when he was on the scaffold, turned it down because the girl they offered had sagged cheeks and too sharp a nose. A servant at Toulouse, accused of heresy, made no other defense of his belief than to refer himself to that of his master, a young student in prison with him, and preferred to die rather than let himself be persuaded that his master could err. We read of the people of Arras when King Louis VI took that town, that there were many ordinary folk who let themselves be hanged rather than say, "Long live the king." And among those base souls, the buffoons, there have been some who would not give up their clowning even in death. One, as the hangman set him swinging, cried out, "Let her rip," which was his usual refrain. And another, who, on the point of death, had been laid in a bed of straw along the hearthstone, replied to the doctor, when he asked him where his pain got him, "Between the bench and the fire." And when the priest, to give him extreme unction, tried to find his feet, which his illness had made him draw up to him cramped, he said, "You will find them at the end of my legs." When a man exhorted him to commend himself to God, he asked, "Who is going there?" And the other, replying, "It will soon be you, if he pleases," he rejoined, "I'd really like to be there tomorrow evening." "Just commend yourself to him," went on the other. "You'll be there soon." Then he said, "It is better for me to make my compliments in person." During our late Milanese wars, with so many captures and recaptures, the people, unable to bear such varied changes of fortune, became so firmly resolved on death that I have heard my father say he saw a count made of fully 25 heads of houses who had done away with themselves in a week. He saw a count made of fully 25 heads of houses who had done away with themselves in a week, an incident not unlike that which befell the city of Xanthians, who, besieged by Brutus, flew pell-mell, men, women, and children, into such a frenzied craving for death that there is nothing done to escape death which they did not do to escape life, so that only with difficulty could Brutus save a very small number of them. I've seen one of my intimate friends chase death with a real affection, rooted in his heart by various plausible arguments that I could not rid him of, and rushing headlong, for no apparent reason, with bitter and burning hunger, to the first death that came his way, crowned with a gleam of honor. We have many examples in our time of people, even children, who, for fear of some slight inconvenience, have given themselves up to death. And in this connection, what shall we not fear, says an ancient, if we fear what cowardice itself has chosen for its refuge? If I were to string together here a long list of those of all sexes and conditions and sex, in happier times, who have either awaited death resolutely or sought it voluntarily, and sought it not only to flee the ills of this life, but some simply to flee satiety with living, and others for the hope of a better condition elsewhere, I should never have done. Their number is so infinite that in truth I should make a better bargain to count up those who have feared death. So just this one, Pharaoh the philosopher, being one day in a boat in a great tempest, showed the most frightened among his companions a pig that was there, not at all concerned at this storm, and encouraged them by its example. Shall we then dare to say that this advantage reason, that we make such a fuss about it, and on account of which we think ourselves masters and emperors of the rest of creation, has been put in us for our torment? What good is the knowledge of things if by it we lose the repose and tranquillity we should enjoy without it? And if it puts us into a worse condition than Pharaoh's pig, the intelligence that has been given us for our greatest good, shall we use it for our ruin, combating the plan of nature and the universal order of things, which says that each man shall use his tools and means for his advantage? Very well, someone will tell me, let your rule hold for death, but what will you say of want? And what will you say of pain, which most of the sages have thought the ultimate evil, and those who have denied it in word and have admitted it in practice? When Posidonius was extremely tormented by an acute and painful malady, Pompey went to see him and excused himself for having chosen so poor a time to hear him talk about philosophy. God forbid, said Posidonius, that pain should gain such power over me as to keep me from such a subject. And he threw himself into this same topic, the contempt of pain. But meanwhile it was playing its part and pressing him incessantly, at which he cried, "You may do your worst, pain, yet I will not say that you are an evil. This tale that they make so much of, what has it to do with contempt of pain? He is only arguing about the word, and meanwhile, if these pangs do not move him, why does he interrupt his talk for their sake? Why does he think he is doing a lot by not calling pain an evil? Here all does not consist in imagination. We have opinions about the rest. Here it is certain knowledge that plays its part. Even our senses are judges of it. And if these be not true, all reason then is false. Lucretius. Shall we make our skin believe that the lashes of a strap tickle it, and our palate that aloes is Graves' wine? Here Pharaoh's pig is in the same boat with us. To be sure, he is unafraid in the presence of death, but if you beat him, he will squeal and wriggle. Shall we violate the general law of nature, which can be observed in all that lives under heaven, that we shall tremble under pain? The very trees seem to groan at the blows that are given them. Death is felt only by the mind, since it is a momentary passage. 'Tis past or future, not in it is now. La Boitier. Death holds less pain than does the wait for death. Ovid. 1,000 beasts, 1,000 men are sooner dead than threatened, and in truth, what we say we principally fear in death is pain, its customary forerunner. As likewise poverty has nothing to be feared but this, that it delivers us into the hands of pain, by the thirst, hunger, cold, heat, and sleepless nights that it makes us endure. Thus let us deal only with pain. I grant them, and that willingly, that it is the worst accident of our being. For in all the world I am the man who bears it the most ill will, and who flees it the most, the more so because until now, thank God, I have had no great association with it, but it is in us, if not to annihilate it, at least to lessen it by patience, and even should the body be disturbed by it, to maintain nevertheless our soul and reason in good trim. And if this were not so, who would have brought into credit among us virtue, valor, strength, magnanimity, and resolution? Where would these play their part, if there were no more pain to defy? Courage is greedy of danger. Seneca. If we need not sleep on hard ground, sustain fully armed the heat of noon, feed on a horse or an ass, watch ourselves being sliced open and a bullet torn out from between our bones, let ourselves be sewn up again, cauterized and probed, how shall we acquire the advantage that we wish to have over the common herd? It is a far cry from fleeing evil and pain to what the sages say, that among equally good actions the most desirable to do is the one in which there is most trouble. And for people are happy not in hilarity or sensuality or laughter, nor in games, the comrades of levity, but often even in sadness through firmness and constancy. Cicero. And for that reason it has proved impossible to persuade our fathers that conquests made by main force with the risks of war were no more advantageous than those made in complete safety by diplomatic maneuvers. There is most joy in virtue when 'tis hardest won. Lucan. Furthermore, this should console us that in the course of nature, if the pain is violent, it is short; if it is long, it is light. If heavy, short; if long, light. Cicero. You will not feel it very long. If you feel it too much, it will put an end to itself or to you. Both come to the same thing. If you cannot bear it, it will bear you off. Remember that death ends the greatest ills, that the small ones have many intervals of respite, and that we are masters of the moderate ones, so that if they are bearable, we shall bear them; if not, we can leave life as we leave a theatre when the play ceases to please us. Cicero. What makes us endure pain so poorly is that we are not accustomed to find our principal contentment in the soul. Even as the enemy grows keener at our flight, so pain waxes proud to see us tremble beneath it. It will make itself far easier to deal with to those who stand up against it. We must resist it and tense ourselves against it. By turning tail and retreating, we call upon us the ruin that threatens us. But let us come to those examples which are really the quarry for weak-backed people like myself, in which we shall find that it is with pain as with the stones, which take on a brighter or duller color according to the foil they are set in, and that it occupies in us only as much room as we give it. They have suffered just so much as they have given in to pain, says St. Augustine. We feel a surgeon's cut with the razor more than 10 sword strokes in the heat of combat. The pains of childbirth considered great by the doctors and by God himself, and which we surround with so many ceremonies. There are whole nations that take no account of them. I leave aside the Lacedaemonian women, but in the Swiss women among our foot soldiers, that what change do you find, except that as they trot after their husbands, you see them today carrying around their neck the child that they had yesterday in their belly? And those counterfeit Egyptian women who have shown up in our midst go themselves and wash their newborn children and take a bath in the nearest river. A simple Spartan boy, after stealing a fox and putting it under his cape, endured its gnawing his stomach rather than betray himself, for they feared even more the shame of clumsiness in stealing than we fear its punishment. And another, offering incense at a sacrifice, when the coal fell into his sleeve, let himself be burned to the bone rather than disturb the mystery. And many of them have been seen who, merely to test their manliness according to their habits of upbringing, have at the age of 7 endured being whipped to death without changing expression. Everyone knows the story of Scaevola, who, having slipped into the enemy's camp to kill their leader, and having failed in his attempt, in order to make good his purpose by a still stranger device and free his country, not only confessed his plan to Porsenna, the king he wanted to kill, but added that there were in his own camp a great number of Romans accomplices in the undertaking, just like him. And to show this stuff he was made of, having had a brazier brought upon him, he saw and suffered his arm to be grilled and roasted, until the enemy himself, struck with horror, ordered the brazier to be taken away. What of the man who did not deign to interrupt the reading of his book while he was being cut open, and the one who persisted in matching his ridicule and laughter against the pains inflicted on him, so that the exasperated cruelty of the executioners who were holding him, and all their inventing of redoubled tortures, one upon the other, acknowledged him the winner. But he was a philosopher. What of Caesar's gladiator, who, laughing all the while, endured the probing and cutting open of his wounds? Let us bring in the women. Who has not heard tell in Paris of the one who had herself flayed just to gain the fresher complexion of a new skin? There are some who have had healthy teeth yanked out so as to make their voice softer and richer, or to arrange their other teeth in a better order. How many examples of the contempt for pain we have in this sex? What can they not do? What do they fear? If only they may hope for some increase in their beauty. Their labor is to pluck the white hairs from their place, and stripping off the skin to make them a new face. Tibullus. I have seen some of them swallow sand and ashes, and work deliberately to ruin their stomach so as to get pale complexions, to get a slim body, Spanish style. What torture do they not endure, tight-laced and braced, until they suffer great gashes in their sides, right to the live flesh, yes, sometimes even until they die of it. I am very glad that we have witnesses near at hand where we need them more, for Christendom provides us with plenty, and after the example of our holy guide, there are many who out of piety have willed to bear the cross. We learn by a witness most worthy of belief, Joinville, that King Louis the Saint wore the hair shirt until in his old age his confessor gave him dispensation, and that every Friday he had his priest flog his shoulders with 5 little iron chains, which he always carried about for that purpose in a box. William, our last Duke of Guigny, father of the Eleanor who transmitted that duchy to the house of France and England, wore continually for the last 10 or 12 years of his life a corselet under a monk's dress for penance. Fulk, Count of Anjou, went all the way to Jerusalem to have himself scourged there by 2 of his servants, a rope around his neck before the sepulchre of our Lord. But do we not see every Good Friday in various places a large number of men and women beating themselves until they tear their flesh and cut it to the bone? That I have often seen, and without enchantment, and it was said that there were some, for they go masked, who for money undertook in this way to ensure other people's religion, with a contempt for pain all the greater as the spurs of piety are greater than those of avarice. Q. Maximus buried his son, a consul, M. Cato, his a praetor elect, and L. Paulus, both of his, within a few days, with a calm face that bore no sign of grief. Once in my time I said of someone jokingly that he had cheated divine justice, for the violent death of 3 grown-up children having been sent him in one day as a bitter scourge, as may well be believed. He all but took it as a favor, and I have lost 2 or 3, but while they were still nursing, if not without grief, at least without repining. Yet there is hardly any accident that touches men more to the quick. I see enough other common occasions for affliction which I should scarcely feel if they happened to me, and I have disdained some, when they came to me, to which the world has given such an atrocious appearance that I wouldn't dare boast of my indifference to them to most people without blushing. Whence it is understood that grief lies not in nature but in opinion. Cicero. Opinion is a powerful performer, bold and immoderate, who ever with such hunger sought security and repose as Alexander and Caesar sought unrest and difficulties. Therese, the father of Sophocles, was wont to say that when he was not making war, it seemed to him that there was no difference between him and his groom. How many we know who have fled the sweetness of a tranquil life in their homes among their friends to seek the horror of uninhabitable deserts, who have flung themselves into humiliation, degradation, and the contempt of the world, and have enjoyed these and even sought them out. Cardinal Borromeo, who died lately in Milan, held to so austere a way of life in the midst of the debauchery to which his nobility, his great riches, the atmosphere of Italy, and his youth invited him, that the same robe that served him in summer served him in winter. He slept on straw only, and the hours he had left from the duties of his position he spent in continual study, planted on his knees, having a little bread and water beside his book, but no other food and no other time for eating. I know those who knowingly have derived profit and advancement from cuckoldry, the mere name of which frightens so many people. If sight is not the most necessary of our senses, it is at least the most pleasant. But the most pleasant and useful of our members seem to be those which serve to beget us. Yet many people have conceived a mortal hatred for them, merely because they were too likable, and have rejected them because we prize and value them so highly. And this was the opinion about his eyes of the man who put them out. One man, to achieve poverty, cast his money into the same sea that so many others ransack up and down to fish out riches. Epicurus says that being rich is not an alleviation but a change of troubles. In truth, it is not want but rather abundance that breeds avarice. I want to tell my experience in this matter. I have lived in 3 kinds of situations since I came out of childhood. The first period, which lasted nearly 20 years, I spent with none but casual means and dependent on the authority and help of others, without rule or fixed revenue. My spending was done the more joyously and carelessly for being all at the hazard of fortune. I was never better off. I never had the experience of finding my friends' purses closed, since I had enjoined on myself beyond all other necessities the necessity of not failing to pay up at the time I had chosen. This they had extended 1,000 times, seeing the effort I made upon myself to satisfy them, so that I repaid them with a thrifty and somewhat deceptive honesty. I feel naturally a certain sensual pleasure in paying, as if I were unburdening my shoulders of a troublesome weight and of that image of slavery. Besides, there is a certain satisfaction which tickles me when I do a just action and make others content. I accept the payments where you must come to bargain and haggle, for if I do not find someone to give this chore to, I put them off shamefully and unjustly as long as I can, for fear of the sort of altercation with which my humor and my way of speaking are wholly incompatible. There is nothing I hate like bargaining. It is a pure interchange of trickery and shamelessness. After an hour of disputing and haggling, both men go back on their word and their oath for a gain of 5 sous. And so I used to borrow at a disadvantage, for having no heart to make my request in the other's presence, I trusted its chances to paper, which is a poor advocate and lends a helping hand to refusal. I referred the handling of my need more gaily to the stars, and more freely than I have ever referred it since to my foresight and sense. Most good managers think it horrible to live thus in uncertainty, and do not realize that, in the first place, most people live thus. How many good men have cast away all their security, and do so every day to pursue the wind of royal favor and of fortune? Caesar went into debt for more than 1,000,000 in gold beyond what he was worth to become Caesar. And how many merchants begin their traffic by the sale of their farms, which they send to the Indies, across so many stormy seas? Catullus. In our present great drought of devotion, we have thousands and thousands of congregations which spend life comfortably, expecting every day from the liberality of heaven what they need for dinner. In the second place, those good managers do not consider that this certainty on which they rely is scarcely less uncertain and chancy than chance itself. I see misery as close from beyond 2,000 crowns of income as if it were right next to me. For besides that fate has power to open up 100 breaches through our riches to poverty, and to turn all our defenses and ramparts topsy-turvy, I find that for various reasons poverty is seen dwelling as commonly in those who have property as in those who have nothing, and that perhaps it is somewhat less uncomfortable when it is alone than when it is met in company with riches. And more wretched to me seems an uneasy, hard-up, over-busy rich man than he who is simply poor. My second situation was to have money. Having taken to this, I soon laid by considerable reserves for my circumstances, thinking that a man owns only as much as he has beyond his ordinary expenses, and that he cannot rely on what as yet he merely hopes to receive, however clear his hope. For what I would say if I were surprised by such or such an accident, and in the wake of these vain and pernicious imaginings, I would go and exercise my ingenuity to provide by this superfluous reserve for all emergencies, and still could reply to him who pointed out that the number of emergencies was too infinite, that if I could not provide for all, I could for some, and many. This did not go on without painful worry. Was I going on a journey? I never thought I was sufficiently provided, and the bigger my load of money, the bigger my load of fear. Now about the safety of the roads, now about the fidelity of those who had charge over my baggage, of which, like some others I know, I was never sure enough unless I had it before my eyes. Did I leave my strong box at home? How many suspicions, how many thorny and, incommunicable thoughts. My mind was always turned in that direction. If I did not do literally everything I say, at least it cost me dear to keep myself from doing it. I got little or no advantage from this, for as Byron used to say, the man with hair is as angry as the bald man if you pull one out. And once you are accustomed to a certain pile and set your fancy on it, it is no longer at your service. It is a building which seems to you ready to crumble altogether at a touch. Necessity must take you by the throat before you will cut into it. And earlier, I would pawn my clothes and sell a horse with much less reluctance and regret than I would then make a breach in that beloved purse that I had laid by. But the danger lay in the fact that one cannot easily set fixed limits to this desire, and put a check on frugality. We go on ever flattering this pile and increasing it with one sum after another, until we deprive ourselves sordidly of the enjoyment of our own possessions, and place our only joy in keeping them and not using them. Dionysius the Younger did a graceful thing in this connection. He was informed that one of his Syracusans had hidden a treasure in the ground. He told him to bring it to him, which he did, furtively holding back for himself a part of it, with which he went off to another town, where, having lost his appetite for hoarding, he began to live more liberally. Hearing this, Dionysius had the rest of the man's treasure returned to him, saying that since he had learned how to use his money, he was welcome to the rest of it. I was in this state for a few years. I know not what good Damon cast me out of it, most usefully like the Syracusan, and sent into abandonment all this saving, the pleasure of certain trip at great expense having overthrown this stupid fancy. This way I fell into a third kind of life. I say what I feel about it. Certainly much more pleasant and more regulated, which is that I make my expense run abreast with my receipts. Now one is ahead, now the other, but they are never far apart. I live from day to day, and content myself with having enough to meet my present and ordinary needs. For the extraordinary, all the provision in the world could not suffice. If I amass money, it is only in the hope of using it soon, not to buy lands, but to buy pleasure. I have neither any real fear that my money will run out, nor any desire of increasing it. The fruit of riches is abundance, and sufficiency to declares abundance. Cicero. And I am singularly gratified that this correction has come to me at an age naturally inclined to avarice, and that I see myself rid of this malady so common in old men, and the most ridiculous of all human manias. Thus ease and indignance depend on each man's opinion, and neither riches, glory, nor health has any more beauty and pleasure than its possessor lends it. External circumstances take their savor and color from the inner constitution, just as clothes keep us warm not by their heat but by our own, which they are fitted to foster and nourish. He who would shelter a cold body with them will get the same service for cold. Thus are snow and ice preserved. Indeed, just as study is a torment to a lazy man, abstinence from wine to a drunkard, frugality to the luxurious man, and exercise to a delicate idler, so it is with the rest. Things are not that painful or difficult of themselves. It is our weakness and cowardice that make them so. To judge of great and lofty things, we need a soul of the same caliber. Otherwise, we attribute to them the vice that is our own. A straight oar looks bent in the water. What matters is not merely that we see the thing, but how we see it. Well then, why, out of so many arguments which in various ways persuade men to despise death and endure pain, do we not find one that will do for us? And of all the many kinds of fancies which have persuaded others, why doesn't each man apply to himself the one that best suits his humor? If he cannot digest the strong purgative drug to root out the trouble, at least let him take a palliative one to relieve it. For the rest, we do not escape philosophy by stressing immoderately the sharpness of pain and the weakness of man, for we force her to fall back on these unanswerable replies. If it is bad to live in need, at least there is no need to live in need.